There is a very good chance that the state of Texas executed an innocent man for the murder of a nun on Halloween. Hello, true crimerers. This is the Halloween case of Sister Tadea Benz. Viewer discretion is advised. Now that awkwardness is out of the way, huh? If you are seeing me for the very first time here on YouTube, hello, I'm Mike. I tell true crime stories thrice times a week. And I'm also very strange, so there's that. I tell a story on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I also tell short-form true crime stories over on TikTok, where I've got close to 3 million followers because I got my page back. Woot woot. As of me filming this video, we'll see how long that lasts. So please follow me there as well. All of my socials are linked in the link tree in the description of this video and all of my videos below. In there, you will also find the link to my merch. We ship internationally. I also have a Discord server, but be over the age of 18 or else you'll be kicked out of it. Sorry, not sorry. And then lastly, if there's a case you want me to cover, please email me at makingatruecrimerertwo. That's also listed below. Just email me the name of the person, where it happened, when it happened, and I will add it to my list. I have over 5,200 names on that list, though. I pick my cases at random, so it may be a while before I get to that case, but I will eventually. Swear it. Well, now that I'm done with that insanely loud intro, let's get into today's story. Tadea Benz was actually born in Switzerland in 1905. I don't really know much of anything about her, unfortunately, but I know at this point of the story she had moved to Amarillo, Texas, and she was a sister for the Catholic Church. She was a nun. Specifically, she was a nun at the St. Francis Convent in Amarillo, Texas. It was Halloween, but the morning of Halloween, kids had not gone out trick-or-treating yet. They had not put on their costumes yet. Bright and early, just as the day was getting started, a few of the nuns had entered the convent that morning, and they found that Sister Tadea Benz, who lived there at the convent, of course, her door was closed, which was unusual because typically they left their doors open. So they opened up her door and they found her on the floor next to her bed. Sister Benz was nude, and at first they didn't notice any signs of like foul play. They didn't see any blood at first, but when they kind of moved her onto her back, her face was completely bloody and she was absolutely deceased, and it was clear at that point that someone had killed her. She was actually sent to the funeral home directly, but they did still perform an autopsy, and they determined that she had a lot of injuries. She was sexually assaulted. They did discover that. And she was also beaten. Someone had hit her, probably with their fists, and she was also stabbed numerous times. And the other nuns contacted the Amarillo police. They arrived and they secured her bedroom, which was located on the second floor of the convent. They collected as much evidence as they could, including the sheets from the bed. They took the clothing that was found in the room near her. They found a knife under the bed with blood on it, so they assumed that this was probably the murder weapon. But you would think the beating and the stabbing was probably what led to her death, but it actually wasn't. Her cause of death was strangulation. So this poor woman was sexually assaulted, she was beaten, she was stabbed, and then she was strangled until she was dead. She was a 76-year-old woman. By the way, I can't remember if I told you the year this happened, but this was Halloween in 1981. So also at the autopsy, the coroner did find semen inside Sister Benz, but for some reason, because back in 1981, they didn't have the DNA testing that we know today, but they were able to at least take a sample and determine the blood type. But for some reason, they didn't run that test. But I believe they stored it. The the sample. About an hour or so after the nuns found the body, they also saw in their community room that a window had been broken open, and that was located on the first floor. So they assumed that that was how this perpetrator entered. When police canvass the area, they get witnesses, and across the street, I believe, from the convent was a neighborhood, and a witness stated they saw a young man running from the convent at some point in the very early morning hours, or possibly the night before. The witness who said they saw this person identified the individual as Johnny Frank Garrett, a 17-year-old kid who was kind of known to police in the area, and he lived across the street. When police go to his home to question him, they are allowed to go inside the house. They notice, they have a set of knives in this house, and there is a steak knife missing. And the knife that was found underneath Sister Benz's bed was a steak knife. And they concluded that it was the exact same steak knife that would have been a part of that collection, and there was that one missing knife. They also dusted that knife for fingerprints, and the fingerprints came back as to belonging to Johnny Frank Garrett. And here's the thing. Johnny admits that he was in the convent earlier that night, the night before. He actually stated to police that he busted out the window on the first floor and entered the convent, and he intended, I guess he stole a stereo. And that could explain why the knife was maybe left inside the convent somewhere. And maybe that's why it got dropped, and maybe someone else picked it up and used it to stab Sister Benz. It would explain why his fingerprints were on it. But then, according to police, they bring him into the actual police station to further question him. Because he's now basically he placed himself inside that convent around the time this nun is murdered. It's the knife from their house. It's got his fingerprints on it. And apparently, he, after some time, confesses to the murder. He stated that he broke in the way he said he broke in, with the intent of stealing something. He found his way into a nun's room on the second floor, and that's when he noticed there was actually someone sleeping in the bed. The nun woke up and startled him, and he startled her, and he said that she was going to scream, so he covered her mouth and choked her until she passed out. He then says he had sex with her, and then he left the convent the way he entered it. Now, the confession was not recorded on audio. A detective was basically transcribing the confession. The detective claims that this is what Johnny was saying. Johnny would later say that what actually happened in the room was the detective was saying what happened, and Johnny responded with, "Yeah, go ahead and write that down. Go ahead and write that down." But Johnny wouldn't sign the confession because he said he didn't actually make that confession, that those were lies. But he was arrested and charged with her murder all the same. They had his, and he did confirm, he actually stated, "Yes, I did break into the convent. Yes, I did go in there with the intent to steal things." But he says at that point, he never entered the nun's room, and he never killed her. He never had sex with her. He didn't do any of that. Well, then how is your knife from your house in there? Well, I brought it with me, and maybe he dropped it and didn't realize he dropped it. And maybe another person came in. Coincidence that two people break into the same convent in the same night? It's crazy, but maybe. So there was the physical evidence putting him in the convent, but again, he admitted to being in there. However, the fact they never tested the semen that was found with Sister Benz. Again, they would have only known the blood type, and had they tested it and had it not come back as being, Johnny Frank's blood type, Johnny Frank Garrett's blood type, then this never would have moved forward. But they never tested it at all. But at the trial, the written out confession that was not signed by Johnny Frank Garrett And even though he, in his defense, denied ever saying that he killed her, they also presented the evidence of the fingerprints, the knife that it was from his house. It was apparently enough. And, you know, I understand why it was enough, especially back in 1981. And there's a reason, by the way, why I feel like I have some doubts. Because so far I presented it in a way that seems like he's probably the guy. But I'll get to something else here in a few minutes. Johnny Frank Garrett was convicted of the murder. When he was convicted, if he did commit this crime, he was 17 years old at the time. This is Amarillo, Texas. This is Texas. They execute anyone. So he was sentenced to death after he was convicted of the murder. Later on, during a couple of his appeals, he would bring up the fact that the DNA was never tested. It was never tested, and they still don't have the technology to really test it yet. His appeal attorneys would state that, like, Johnny had a super low IQ. He had mental health issues. He had a criminal past. The detectives and the prosecutors just wanted it to be an easy, you know, open and shut case. He's the guy. I mean, he just has to be the guy, so he's the guy. So his appeals get denied. His execution was scheduled for January 6th, 1992, but within an hour of the execution, the governor of Texas at the time gave him a reprieve because Pope John Paul II came forward in defense of Johnny. Then it goes to the Texas, Board of Paroles and Pardons. They vote on this, and it's 17-0, and he's then rescheduled to be executed. His attorneys are trying to get any other kind of reprieve, and this is when Johnny's history comes into play. A psychologist would work with Johnny for some time while he's on death row. Johnny had severe mental health issues. And this is because he had an extremely abusive upbringing. He had severe head trauma from when he was a child. He had brain injuries, and that led to paranoid delusions. He, while on death row, because of his delusions, said the lethal injection won't even kill me, that he would be okay. Johnny, throughout his childhood, was repeatedly sexually assaulted by his stepfather many times. He was also beaten physically by his stepfather. He was forced to perform sexual acts on his stepfather. He was also forced into filming pornographic films as a child by his stepfather. There were numerous videos recorded of this kid doing pornographic things. I'm talking 8, 9, 10 years old. And because of the people he was around, these abusive people, his brain was also subjected to substances like paint thinners and drugs. None of this information was given to the jury during his trial. None of this information was given to the jury when it came to sentencing him, because it is not something, you cannot execute someone who is mentally unwell, someone who is psychotic, someone who has a very low IQ. Johnny was one of the most qualified, if you will, people. Even if he did commit the crime or didn't commit the crime, he was the most qualified to not be executed, just based on all of the credentials that he had. Severe mental health issues. He was a paranoid delusion. His brain was broken. His IQ was extremely low. This all should have been, we can't execute this guy. We can put him away for the rest of his life, but we can't execute him. All of that then was presented to, in order to get a last minute stay of execution. It didn't work. They still said, okay, they actually said, yes, he is unwell. We can see that he is definitely not well up here, but he was well enough to know what he was doing when he killed Sister Benz and sexually assaulted her. Okay, again, yeehaw, this is Texas. On February 11th, 1992, at the Huntsville Correctional Facility in Texas, 28-year-old Johnny Frank Garrett was executed by lethal injection. There was rumors going around that Johnny's last words were, "I'd like to thank my family for loving me and for taking care of me. The rest of the world can kiss my ass." However, the official word is that he actually gave no final statement. And so that's always been, I guess, up for debate of whether he said that or not. So here's where the doubt, the real doubt, comes in. 12 years later, 12 years after Johnny was executed, they would take that DNA, thanks to an attorney who was basically working with Johnny's family to, get him exonerated even after death, to say, because everyone believed that he was innocent. Like, the people around him, everyone just swore up and down he was innocent. They still had DNA from the sexual assault kits that was done on Sister Benz. So 12 years after he's executed, they actually get approval to test that DNA. It did not match Johnny Frank Garrett. It did match someone else. A man named, and I might say his name wrong, Leoncio Perez Rueda. Well, who was he? Well, he, at the time they did this test, was a convicted murderer. He sexually assaulted and murdered a 77-year-old woman named Narnie Box Bryson. I don't know what other evidence they had, but I read somewhere that there was other evidence at the crime scene of Sister Benz's crime scene that would also place Mr. Rueda there at her crime scene. But the fact of the matter is the individual who sexually assaulted her the night of her murder was not Johnny Frank Garrett. It was this Mr. Rueda, who is now in prison for the exact same crime, for sexually assaulting and murdering in the same way, by the way, the same method. Sister Benz is also in her late 70s. She's sexually assaulted. She's murdered the same way this other victim was murdered. His DNA. And so now what people are saying, these people who are just unable to accept that they may have gotten this wrong, they said, well, okay, that's just evidence that she was sexually assaulted by another man and then was killed by Johnny. But then that means that Johnny and this Leoncio person were working together, and they had no evidence to support that at all. There's no evidence they even knew each other. These are like two very different people. Johnny placed himself in the convent. He said he broke in earlier that night with the intent of stealing things. He brought his own tools with him, probably the knife. He may have dropped it. And then by chance someone else broke in and sexually assaulted the nun. What are the odds of this man sexually assaulting her but not killing her? Just doing that and then leaving. Considering 3 months later, he goes on to do the exact same thing to another woman and murders her. But as it stands, he is serving the rest of his life in prison for that murder. He has never been charged in any connection with the murder of Sister Tadea Benz, because, according to the state of Texas, they got the right guy, they executed him. He's dead. Even if Johnny was the killer, there is so much that goes against executing him, just based on the rule of law, the qualifications and all of that. He should not have been executed. He shouldn't have been. I mean, listen, I'm not anti-death penalty. I'm not pro-death penalty. I'm kind of like in the middle. Like, if you 100% committed that crime, we know that for an absolute fact, and you're sentenced to death, it's kind of like, that's your punishment. But if there's doubt that a person committed a murder, you shouldn't be so quick to just execute them. Especially someone who is what Johnny was. Like, it's frustrating. And then you have that DNA evidence that comes out 12 years after he's executed that someone else sexually assaulted this woman. And they're still saying, well, yeah, okay. And at the end, Sister Tadea Benz is the victim here. Did she get justice? Did she really? We don't know, because it sounds like Texas just doesn't really, it's like, We're done with it. It's old news. Let's get over it. And if you executed the wrong man, then you have another victim on your hands, because that's murder. You killed an innocent person. The way I've grown up, that's called murder. It's just it's frustrating. It's so it's just like unbelievable that an innocent man, because it happens, innocent people have been executed. He isn't the first, if he is innocent. And if I were on a jury in this case and I had the evidence of his past, and then I was able to somehow, it was more current where we have that DNA, there's no way he would have been convicted. I wouldn't have said guilty. I would have had doubts. And that's the whole thing. Reasonable doubt, but too bad it was after the fact. So I just have to sit here and wonder, did Sister Tadea Benz truly get the justice she rightfully deserved? What do you guys think? Post your opinions below. But that is it for this case, True Crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I drew a blank. I don't know what to say. I usually would spitfire some random nonsense thing, but I just drew a blank. Oh shit, okay. That's, usually I end my videos in a very mentally unwell way, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't. No one's perfect. Hey, how do you like my Halloween decks? Huh? I got a little kitty cat, if you can even see him. I got a ghost and a pumpkin. Did that for you guys. You're welcome. I don't even know if you can see him. Maybe you can't, and maybe this is all just stupid. Oh, I also got a Jurassic Park guy. I got a new pop figure thing. Jurassic Park fella. Welcome to Jurassic Park. Hey, guess what? It's become unhinged. Oh, good. Circled backed. Circled backed? Backed. Not a word. Backed. I'm so happy with myself. I finally became mentally unwell again. Great. Okay.